Dear students, today we are going to discuss about the chapter, that is third chapter in 10th standard science. That is what?
Metals and non-metals.
Very good. Metals and non-metals. So what are metals? Can you? Yes.
Copper,
You stand up and say.
aluminum, magnesium, gold, zinc.
So these are the examples of metals. I asked you, what are metals? Sit down. Then what are non-metals? Can any one of you give me the example for non-metal? It's okay. Come on, we are going to discuss this chapter, metals and non-metals. You know some of the examples of metals. And somebody knows some of the examples of non-metals. What are exactly called metals? Metals are some group of elements which occupies some of the properties, isn't it? If you take an example of any kind of metal, let us say this is an iron. If we say, if you hold the iron, what properties of the iron does it have by looking? So it is hard. If we drop the metal, it produces sound. If we rub the metal iron, it shines, isn't it? So these are the properties. So on the basis of the properties of some metals, we say that metals occupy some of the properties. On the basis of the properties itself, we say the given example is a metal or non-metal. Come on, what are the properties of these metals are there? Let us discuss one by one. So in this chapter, we are going to learn about physical properties of metals. That is what so far we have told. It produces sound if we drop, if we rub it, it is shining. If we hit it by the hammer, it will be like a sheet, thin like sheet. It is called malleable property. And I see there are ornaments in your neck, isn't it? Chain. So they are just like a threads, See, iron threads to tie something, fencing. Beli haklikke iron tantiಗಳು ತಗೊಳ್ಳಲ್ವಾ? That is the thin wire. So that property is called ductility. The property of the metal to be there like a wire is called ductility. The property of the metal will be there in the form of sheet. ಈ ಅಂತರಗಿಂತ ಕಟ್ಟಿಸ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, sheet ತರ ಇರ್ತದೆ ನೋಡಿದ. So that sheet, we can make any metal, some kind of metals, into the form of a sheet. So that property of metal into making a property of sheet is called malleable property. Some of the metals like gold, silver, it is not silavara, it is silver, belly. Silavara in the sense that is aluminium, isn't it? So that kind of property is called malleable property, ductile property, produces sound, sonorous property, and its shining property. These are all the properties we see in the metals, and also some properties in the non-metals. What properties metals doesn't have, that property these non-metals have. Some of one or two metals will be excluded in these two. So all these what we have discussed is physical properties. Let us count these physical properties later, and after that we are going to see chemical properties. Chemical properties of what? Chemical properties of metal and also chemical properties of non-metals. If you take the textbook, so here the green colored metals boxes are there. These are all metals, isn't it? There is a pink colored boxes, so they are not metals and they are not also non-metals. They are metalloids, isn't it? And some of the boxes which are there in yellow color, so those boxes elements are called non-metals. See here, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon, helium, these are all non-metals. Phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, isn't it? Krypton, xenon, radon. So these are all non-metals. Non-metals are very few. Okay. Non-metals are very few. Metals are maximum. Metalloids are very, very, very few. So in the textbook you can see that the yellow color metals, yellow color in the textbook, in the periodic table, the boxes which are there in the yellow color are non-metals. The boxes which are there in the pink color, they are metalloids. The boxes which are colored green are metals. See, this is the physical properties of the metals and the non-metals. In this chapter, what other thing we are going to discuss after these two? We are going to discuss how the metals and non-metals are going to react with air. Action of air on metals and non-metals. So if we take, say for example, iron, if we take iron, how this iron is going to react with oxygen? Very good example you can produce. Yes, you stand up and say how oxygen is going to react with the iron. Can anyone of you say how does the iron rusts? Rusting of iron is just because of oxygen. Oxygen will rust because of oxygen. So this is one of the good examples. Action of air on metals and non-metals. And non-metals. After that, what is the action of water on metals and non-metals? How does the water react with metals and how does the water react with non-metals? That is what we are going to study in this chapter. And action of acids. How many acids are there? Hydrochloric acid, H2SO4 sulfuric acid, HNO3 nitric acid. So these are the three acids we know in general. Okay, there are still more acids. These are laboratory acids. All the kitchen items which are tasting sour in taste are all acids, you know that. How does this acids react with metals and non-metals? And how does metal react with non-metal? We know that metals and non-metals are going to react with air, water, acid. Then what happens when metal is going to react with non-metal? So that is what we are going to discuss in this chapter. After this, we see metallurgy. We see metallurgy. It is not the metal allergy. It is metallurgy. I mean, the refining of ore of any metal into the pure metal is called metallurgy. Metallurgy means we are going to find the ores of the metals, we refine that, we extract that ore and from the mining, and we separate it, we refine it, and we get the metals. So metallurgy we are going to see. In metallurgy we see many steps. Let us see that later. These are the 7 important things we are going to study in our chapter metals and non-metals. That's it, dear students. So among these 7, today we are going to see the physical properties of metals and non-metals. Okay? Yes, dear students, we know some of the physical properties of metals in general we have discussed so far. Let us recall it one by one. Some of the metals, according to the activity which is given in our textbook, the activity name, that is 3.1. This activity says that metals are shining. If you rub the metal, or if you wash the utensils, ನೀವು ಪಾತ್ರೆಗಳನ್ನು ಬೆಳಗ್ತಿರ್ತಾನೆ, ಬೆಳಗಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಏನಾಗಿರ್ತಾರೆ? If you rub one metal into another metal, it gives some kind of shining, isn't it? On rubbing, metals gives shining. That property of metal is called shining property. This is the very first property. And some metals, if you want to cut through the knife, it won't, because almost all the metals are very hard. The second property of the metals are generally hard. Okay. Some of the metals which can be made it into the sheet, like in Kannada we say the roof of the house, sheets, ತಗಡು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಲ್ಲ, isn't it? See, some of the metals can be made into sheets. That property of the metal which turns metal into a form of sheet, that is called malleability. Malleability means turning metal into sheet by the hammer, metal into sheet. This property of the metal is called the malleable property of metal, or malleability. Same thing, some of the metals can be made into wires. So that kind of metals obey the property of the wire, that is called the ductility. What is the ductility? Metals are turning into wires. Turning metals into wires. So this is sheets and this is wires. So the property is called ductility. And if we say, generally we know that almost all the metals are conducting heat. I told you already, if you put one end of the metal into the heat and hold the other end in your hand, as long as the flame burning, so after some time you will get heat, because metals conduct heat from one end of the metal to the another end, flows, so that we can say that metals conduct heat. Not only heat, it also conducts electricity. That is, we know already. For the electricity, there are wires. So in household electric instruments we use copper wires. So transportation of huge distance, we use aluminium wires, because aluminium wire is comparatively very cheap when compared with copper. So copper conducts very good electricity, greater than aluminium. So we use household electricity system, that is copper wire we use to transport one place to another place. We use aluminum wires, you know. There are many electric poles. In almost all the electric poles they use only aluminum wires, and iron wire is also conduct electricity, but the electricity quality, I mean iron is not that much very good conductor when compared with aluminum and copper. So we use copper and aluminum for the maximum extent to transport current from one place to another. So it says that metals conduct electricity, and if we drop any kind of metal from the height, it uses some kind of sound. So metals are sonorous. Dear students, what the properties have been discussed right now, these are the properties of the metals. There are 7 points. If we consider heat and electricity 2 points, there are 7 points. So these are the very important general properties of the metals. This is all about the metals, and let us see the properties of non-metals. Properties of non-metals. Yes, dear students, so far we have discussed about the properties of metals. There were completely 7 properties were there, you know that, and we did not discuss about the examples of the metals. I didn't write over here because you know it very well. So examples are iron, copper, aluminium, gold, silver. These are all the magnesium, isn't it? Very important metals you are familiar with. Examples of metals you are familiar with. Now we are going to see about the non-metals. What are non-metals and what is the properties of them? Non-metals are the metals which doesn't have any property what metals have. ಮೆಟಲ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಯಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿದೆಯೋ ಅವು ಯಾವ ಪ್ರಾಪರ್ಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ನಾನ್ ಮೆಟಲ್ಸ್ ಹೊಂದಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂಥವುಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ನಾನ್ ಮೆಟಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ನಾನ್ ಮೆಟಲ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಮೆಟಲ್ಸ್ which doesn't carry any kind of properties of metals. I mean, metals are not sonorous. If we drop it, they will not produce sound. If we rub the metal, it won't give any kind of shining. Metals are not shining. Metals are not that much hard. Okay, metals are generally solid and gaseous. There is only one metal which is in liquid. Who says this? Which kind of metal? You stand up and say, Prasad, because somebody even now also don't know which is the only one metal which is in a liquid state. Do you know that? ನಿಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿತ್ತ ಮುಂಚೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. The only non-metal which is there in liquid form is bromine. Almost all the non-metals, either they are in solid or they are in gaseous form. I told you already in the periodic table at the last page of your textbook, you can see that the yellow colored boxes are there. So helium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine. These are all the non-metals, isn't it? So we were discussing about the properties of metals that will not be there in non-metals. So the first one is sonorous. It doesn't. Non-metals are not sonorous. Non-metals are not shining. Non-metals are not hard. Non-metals cannot be made into malleable. Malleability property doesn't obey. And ductile property. Non-metals doesn't conduct electricity except carbon. Carbon pencil, you know, pencil carbon conducts electricity. Except there are some exceptions. Not exactly almost 100% equality is not there. there are some exception. If we remove that exception, what metals property it has, all the properties these non-metals does it have. This is the only the definition of non-metals. So non-metals doesn't conduct electricity and heat, so these are called non-metals. Let us say, for example, the examples of non-metals. We can write the properties of non-metals. We can write. See, they are not shiny. Okay. Non-metals are not hard. Okay. Non-metals are not sonorous. Okay. Non-metals are not malleable. So malleable property doesn't obey here. Malleable. Okay. Non-metals are not ductile. Non-metals doesn't conduct electricity. Does not conduct electricity. Heat and electricity. So what is the last one? What we have dropped? Sonorous. Sonorous is almost there. Okay. 6 and 7. Okay, that's all. So these are the properties of non-metals. Example. Yes, can anybody tell me examples? Oxygen. Oxygen is there in the form of gas. Sulfur. Sulfur gas or solid? Solid. It is there. Is it given here? Yes. Hydrogen. It is there in the gas. Like this, we can write bromine. Bromine is the only one non-metal which is there in the liquid form. Okay. So these are all the examples of non-metal. You can write by seeing the textbook, last page of your textbook. This is all about the properties of non-metals. So after this we are going to see the chemical properties of metals and non-metals. Come on, let us see the chemical properties of metals and non-metals.